Okay, so I just released my quick out of the theater reaction for Death of a Unicorn, and now this is going to be my spoiler-free review on the film. If you haven't seen the film, don't worry, you are safe here. I'm not going to spoil I'm not going to spoil a thing. I cannot speak properly tonight. I apologize. But I got to see this film early. This film doesn't come out in Australia till the 10th, so we're still a few days away from that, so I'm glad I got a chance to see it early so I can put out an early review for you guys. But if you haven't already, please feel free to go check out my quick out of the theater reaction, which is now live on my channel, or just watch this video. You know, if you watch any of my content, you are supporting the channel, you are supporting me, so thank you very much for that, and I'm glad that you like my content. But yeah, without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive straight into Death of a Unicorn. So the story to this one follows Jenna Ortega and Paul Rudd. You know, they drive down to this wealthy people's house to finalize a business deal, and there's a unicorn thrown into the mix and chaos ensues. And that's all I'm going to say about the story, because I went into this film completely blind. I didn't watch any of the trailers. You know, I saw the poster floating around online. I didn't read any reviews on it. I didn't watch any clips. So I went into this film as blind as possible. All I knew about it is that this was an A24 production and that it was a killer unicorn movie, and that was enough to get me into the theater. This being a killer unicorn movie, you know, I thought that there's so much potential there. However, you know, I was cautious because this is an A24 movie, which, you know, A24, you know, I have a love-hate relationship. You know, they've done some really good stuff. You know, they did, you know, Talk to Me a couple of years ago, which I really enjoyed that movie. And then they've done some movies that I wouldn't say I'm the particularly biggest fan of. You know, they did Midsommar and Hereditary, which, you know, those movies, they aren't bad, but, you know, they're not the greatest in the world. So, you know, A24, you never really know what you're going to get. You could get a very, you know, a very artistic experience, an experience that you've never, you know, gotten before, or you could get a very entertaining movie. And, you know, luckily for me, this film is much more on that spectrum. This is a very entertaining movie. And one of the things I want to talk about first is the titled character, is the unicorn. You know, we all went to this movie because we want to see unicorn carnage. We want to see the unicorn in action, and this film delivers on it in spades. I am happy to report that this film really commits to what it is. This is a very silly concept. It's a ridiculous premise, and this film just has fun with it. You know, this is a film that's pure, its sole purpose is to entertain you. And another thing I want to kind of say is the CGI in the kill scenes and the CGI on the unicorn, you know, it doesn't look great. You know, however, I think that made the movie so much more enjoyable to me. You know, I think the very silly approach that they took to the creation of the unicorn, I don't know, that added like a really fun aspect to the movie for me. And, you know, there is a setup of the movie. You don't really see the unicorn till about 45-50 minutes into the movie, but once the unicorn does show up on screen till the very end credits, it's just unicorn action galore. There's a lot of screen time dedicated to it, and it is very entertaining to watch. It's very entertaining to see the unicorn, you know, rip the limbs from people and crush heads and kill these characters in all sorts of bloody ways. You know, all of that shit is really entertaining to watch in this movie, and the kills are very over the top. There's a couple of really memorable kills in the film, which I really liked. I really liked the lore and the history that they set up in this movie. I won't get into any specifics, but they do dive into, unicorn mythology, which I really liked that aspect to the movie, and I thought that added some extra weight to the movie. And then putting that aside, we have a great cast in here. We have Paul Rudd, who is a great comedic actor, and he is really great in the movie. We have Richard Grant, and he's really great in the movie, and he plays more of a supporting character. We have Jenna Ortega, who is in the Scream franchise, who is making much more of a name for herself in the horror community, and I think she does really well in the movie. Everybody, big or small role, everybody gets their time to shine on screen, and everybody has that one scene that you will remember days after watching the movie. The setup to the movie, I thought was good as well. I really liked Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega's chemistry and the arc that their characters take over the movie, going from this very distant relationship at the start of the movie, and then seeing how that changes and develops as the movie goes along, and seeing where the eventual end game for that arc leads. I really enjoyed the final message that the movie ends off on. I enjoyed some of the metaphors and the themes that this film does address. I don't want to get too much into it, but it deals with, it goes into, the afterlife and, deceased family members, and yeah, that's all I will say about that, which, I thought that stuff was very interesting, but unfortunately they don't really dive into it all that much, minus a couple of scenes, and I thought that could have been something that they could have really gone deeper into, because I was really interested to kind of see where that would go, I guess. And now going in to the negatives, and my big negative coming out of this movie is this is marketed as a horror comedy, and the humor in this movie just did not work for me. A lot of modern comedy that comes out, it just doesn't work for me. I'm someone that's very picky with comedy, and I felt a lot of the jokes in this movie did not work. There were a couple of slight chuckles at the beginning of the movie, but the comedy did feel very repetitive in the movie, and it did feel very scripted and just not necessary. Actually, no, sorry, that's the wrong use of words there. It felt unnatural. These are punchlines, and these are words that would never come out of characters' mouths. And it gets worse throughout the movie. Once we actually see, this big room of characters, interact, the comedy is absurdly boring, because you can tell when a joke is going to happen is you see the setup for the joke, and then you're kind of following along with it, and then you get to the punchline and it's like, oh, am I supposed to laugh at that? And that's what a lot of the jokes felt to me. I might be a dead human being. I might not have a soul. I might just not have the capability to laugh. But I had that problem with this year's Hard Eyes, and I have it again once here. But putting the comedy aside, this still is a really fun and entertaining movie. While the comedy in this movie didn't work for me, I was in a theater. I didn't have a big crowd, but the crowd I was with, they were screaming and shouting and laughing all at the appropriate moments. This is definitely a crowd pleasing movie, and I think that's the best way to experience it is in a theater on the big screen with a crowd. I think that's really where this movie will have the best viewing experience, because I think when you watch this movie at home, I just don't think it will have the same impact. And I think as a result of that, I think after this movie does finish its theatrical run, unless you get a group of friends together, or you're a little bit tipsy, I really can't see the jokes working without the atmosphere. Being brutally honest there. And then the writing in the movie, it's bad. It's bad, but I can't fault that, because this movie is committing to being a very, silly film, and it does play up on that. There's a whole storyline with unicorn dust and how it looks like cocaine, and there's actually several scenes that do deal with that. And I thought it was kind of funny the last time, but when you continue to replay a joke again and again and again and again, it's not funny. It was funny the first time, kind of. Second time, not funny. Why the fuck would you think it's funny a third time? And just, that's what I mean by the comedy just gets worse, is they start kind of the jokes overplay their welcome, where the filmmakers and the producers think it's a lot funnier than what it actually is. And they do kind of set up something with that storyline where it's I know something here, that you don't. It sets up something like that, which, I was curious to see, where they were going to take that, but they didn't really do anything with it. I understand it's it's drug humor and all of that, but yeah, this film, there's a lot of great stuff in it, but there's also just a lot of storyline ideas that they set up that they don't fully execute. And and I think that was disappointing for me in here. I thought the direction was great. I thought the cinematography was really good. This is a stunning looking movie. The scenery, in the first 10 minutes, is incredible. There's a lot of depth. The background of the mountains and all of that, it looks phenomenal. This is a great looking movie from a cinematography standpoint. And then we have the visual effects, which I thought the visual effects, not special effects, looked great in the movie. There's this whole, I guess, trip aspect. It's almost like an acid trip kind of effect, where there's a lot of different colors. There's a lot going on, and it happens a couple of times throughout the movie. And I thought it looked stunning to look at, and I like what they did with that, and I'm kind of glad that they ended this particular storyline on a note where it doesn't really it doesn't really give answers, as it builds more upon the mystery aspect. And and I think that was a great approach, to take that. The film has a lot of this is humor I can really find like Gen Z, people enjoying. There's like a lot of that type of humor, in the movie. So, which is me, but unfortunately, I'm the standout here, where I just don't find half of what my generation finds funny. So, let's see, what else is there? I thought the horror aspect. So I've talked a lot about the comedy. Now let's move on to the horror. This film, once the horror does kick into gear, it is very committed to the horror, and they do a great job at delivering several sequences that are intense and that are suspenseful. Like, there's an entire segment of the film that takes place out in the forest, which I really enjoyed, and the use of sound design in this particular factor of the film I thought was great, and it worked really well. And there's some cool stuff that they do with shadows in here. There's a scene towards the final 30 minutes of the movie where it deals with this dark alleyway, and the light is flickering on and off, which is a horror trope all on its own. And I enjoyed the setup to that scare, and I enjoyed the payoff where this isn't a spoiler. If you consider this a spoiler, you obviously haven't seen enough horror movies to know this. But there's a scene when the light flickers off, there's nothing there, and then flickers back on, and then there's something there. And I really liked, at least for a second there, I really enjoyed the use of shadow, which I thought was really well done. And and the unicorns, they are intimidating, in the movie. And I feel like some of the best scenes where they looked the best, were at night. It's easy to make CGI kind of, look better, in night sequences than in daytime. And then when we do change setting, or time of day, and it is daylight, CGI doesn't look the best, but I can kind of ignore bad CGI and bad storytelling if I have a great time with a movie. You don't have the budget, that makes sense. But if you're getting an actor like Paul Rudd, this film must have had a really big budget to get a lot of these very big name actors on the film. Let's see, a lot of the, I can't really get into this aspect, but a lot of the personal themes I really liked in the movie. And just, this is just an entertaining, bloody good time. This is a film that that it delivers exactly what you'd expect out of a killer unicorn movie, and it just does not shy away with that, and it just continues to push it and push it and push it, and it is just a great time from beginning to end. To see these big name actors in the same room conversating, it's really good to have this back and forth dialogue moments, and to see them all in the same frame together, that shit's legendary to see. So this film has a lot going for it, and I think if you do go and see this, I think you will be incredibly entertained. There are some standout kills, there's some standout moments, there's some standout performances, and yeah, so I'd highly recommend. This is one of the biggest surprises, you know, of this year for me. You know, so far 25, you know, has been a great year for horror, and you know, we have a lot of, you know, great movies that have recently, you know, been announced. We have, you know, FNAF 2, we have Black Phone, we have Megan 2.0, we have the new Final Destination, we have I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like, you know, this year has a lot of great, you know, horror projects stacking up against it. So, you know, let's see how the rest of the year turns out. But for an A24 film, you know, this film really exceeded my expectations, and it gave me, you know, exactly what I wanted and I wished for. So please go check out Death of a Unicorn. If it's Death of a Unicorn, and shit, I cannot speak tonight. If it's playing near a theatre near you, you know, go check it out. You know, if you're in Australia, you know, like me, they have an advanced screening tomorrow night as well, or if you miss it, you know, please feel free to go, you know, check this out when it does release, you know, on the 10th, and, you know, and see it with your friends. You know, get a big crowd of you together and go see this movie, because, you know, I would love to see, you know, more independent art like this, you know, being produced. So yeah, you know, I have a lot of respect for the creators that made this movie. So anyways, guys, that is my spoiler review for Death of a Unicorn, or spoiler-free review, should I say. And it is 11 o'clock, so excuse my language here. You know, I'm tired here. But yeah, you know, yeah, go check out the movie, and I will see you guys in the next video. Okay, I'm gonna stop rambling at this point. See you next time.